making a decision in someone's best interests. This film looks at how a decision should be made in the best interests of a person who is unable to make the decision for themselves.
If a person is found to lack the ability to make a decision, so again, let's take an example of, say, a young man who's unable to make a decision about medical treatment, the doctor must go through what's commonly referred to as a best interest checklist, and the Act makes it very clear what that must involve. And that includes getting the views, consulting wherever possible with other people who know that individual. So family carers should, in most circumstances, always be consulted about what are the beliefs and values or wishes and feelings of that person. What would that person who lacks capacity decide if they had the capacity to decide as to whether or not have that treatment. So it's a very important role for family carers in terms of helping a decision maker like a doctor decide whether or not to provide someone with treatment.
Most major decisions will involve a best interests meeting.
Our experiences are that we didn't really need it because this one speaks to that one, speaks to that one, speaks to that one, and there's a consensus. So it wasn't a situation in which A was saying yes to this and B was saying over my dead body kind of thing. By the time it got to doing the pegs for Josephine and Matthew, there was a consensus between the speech therapist and the carers and ourselves and the doctors and so forth, and Joe and Matthew, that this should be done.
I think if one is really concerned about something that's happening to a person who might have questionable capacity, you can say, look, hang on a minute, I really think it's in this person's best interest to have a formal best interest discussion about this, which we didn't have in the past.
Gemma Gray finds it helpful if family carers are well prepared for what a best interest meeting will involve.
I often do quite a lot of preparation with families before a meeting, just explaining to them about the process and what the meeting will be like and how, just because it is quite a different sort of meeting, and just really explain to people about the Mental Capacity Act and why we're at this place, really, because I think sometimes if families haven't had experience of the Mental Capacity Act particularly, as professionals who perhaps have been using terminology for several years now, we just sort of rattle off things like best interest meetings and families don't know what you're talking about. So I think I certainly for professionals and other people who I would support, I'd be encouraging people to sort of prepare people beforehand so that they can take a real active part in it. I think one of the most difficult things I suspect for most of us is to not think what we would want if we were that person, and to really hold on to the fact that we have to make a decision in someone else's best interest, but how much we're all influenced by our own beliefs, values, and I just think I raise that quite a lot at best interest meetings, just to remind people that it's about that person's best interest, not what we might want necessarily in that position.
Best interest meetings should involve people who bring a range of perspectives on the decision to be made. When James, a man with learning disabilities, needed to move home, his sister Mary had an important role to play in the best interest meeting.
These big decisions, as this was about where someone lives, someone who lacks capacity to make this decision for themselves, is very challenging, it's emotionally challenging. There's all sorts of feelings that people bring to those meetings.
What was helpful in James's best interests meeting?
Sharing of information and respect for each other, and recognition that from Mary that the support staff for James would know about now more about his day-to-day choices and preferences than perhaps she did, but then she was able to bring the longer-term history into that, and also her ongoing knowledge of him as well. So there was always a really good dynamic, and as Gemma said, there was this feeling of everybody had an equal voice in that process. I think it's really important to have an independent chair, because that frees up the decision maker, which in this case was the funding authority, to really absorb the information, to listen to what people's opinions are, and then be asked by the chair what their decision will be.
Whenever I'm talking with staff around the Mental Capacity Act, I generally talk to them about, I think if you go back to the 5 key principles at the beginning, you can't go very far wrong. And I think what it does do is it shows you a very clear process that you've followed if you're working with someone who lacks capacity. I think if you follow very clearly what the Act says, you know that you will have done what you've meant to have done.
It protects staff as well, because if they can demonstrate that they're making decisions in people's best interests and they can evidence that, then they have that protection around them then.
The 5 key principles of the Mental Capacity Act. All adults have the right to make a decision for themselves, unless it can be shown that they are unable to make it. Everyone should be given all the help and support they need to make a decision before anyone concludes that they cannot make it themselves. People are allowed to make what others might think is an unwise or eccentric decision. Any actions taken or decisions made on behalf of someone who lacks capacity must be done in their best interests. People who lack capacity must not be restricted unnecessarily. If this film has raised issues that you would like to talk about, the Family Carer Support Service will try to help. You can telephone them on 0117 906 1751 or email familycarersupport@hft.org.uk.